Good morning everyone. Continuation on post-colonial criticism. Here today we are going to talk about Orientalism, the next text. You can see there from where we stopped yesterday in the last class. Hence another major book. Most of the important books in post-colonial criticism or post-colonial studies, in the beginning of the time, in the beginning of this theory, its origin, we have already discussed. And now we are going to talk about one of the major books. It's a major book which can be said to inaugurate post-colonial criticism proper. And the text, the beginning text declares it to be Orientalism. You can see it's in italics and it's the name of a text. It's Edward Said's Orientalism, which got published in 1978. Just look at the sentence. Hence another major book which can be said to inaugurate post-colonial criticism. Proper. Post-colonial criticism proper means that with that much seriousness. We talk about that to be inaugurated with the Orientalism by Edward Said, and one of the major critiques of post-colonial studies, which is a specific expose of the Eurocentric universalism, which takes for granted both superiority of what is European or Western and the inferiority of what is not. You are seriously likely to be confused in this regard. See the Orient, the binary opposite like term for Orient is Occident. Orient and Occident. Orient stands for East and Occident for West. Occident. Occident. Please note down the term. Occident. So here Orientalism, what is that? Apart from being the title of a text, what do you mean by Orientalism? To get this concept clearly well, the idea clearly well is very important. Actually, it's a specific expose of the Eurocentric universalism, which takes for granted both the superiority of what is European or Western. It's not about Orientalism, but it's about you looking at which is a specific expose of the Eurocentric universalism, about which we have discussed in detail in the last session itself, or in the first session on post-colonialism itself. Eurocentrism was Europe as the center. Whatever is part and parcel of Europe, European culture, European life, get taken into account as something best or the preferable, ideal, so that whatever is non-European is relegated to the periphery or secondary position, whatever it may be. And you find it very difficult to come out of that barrier, come out of that prejudices. Here, Eurocentrism, please note down, this is Europe as the center, and we have our own ways of thinking, approaching even our life, making use of that as the yardstick, their ways as the yardstick, their life, their culture, their language. You know how much fascinated we are for the Western languages, especially English. You are run behind English medium education. Even after joining for graduate course, for BA English course, every year student come and raise this concern that I've been studying in Malayalam medium schools, so this must be difficult for me to follow this or to excel in this area. But then we try to erase that prejudice. It's a fixation in your mind. Who told you that a person belonging to a person who got Malayalam medium education can never excel in a language like this? It's just a matter of not choice but of interest actually. But people fail to realize that because we feel that English medium education to get English lessons or get lessons in English is very important. It's part of your growth. And some children blame their parents for not getting them admission in English medium schools or not providing them with English medium education. But that's a prejudice only. But here, this Eurocentrism and its impact it's spreading like anything, and that's why we have all these biased thinking, biased approach, perspective towards whatever different aspects in our life. So Europe is, and again, which takes for granted, actually Eurocentric universalism takes for granted both the superiority of what is European or Western. Everything European, everything Western is taken for granted as something great, superior, ideal, role model, and the inferiority of what is not. Whatever is not European, whatever is not Western, we feel like inferior, other. And those terms, inferior, other, subject and the other, the binary, we will discuss that in the coming sessions in the light of this theory itself. And you will understand how problematic this is in draining your own confidence of being a non-European. I belong to this country. I belong to Asian continent. I am not a European, so I am good for nothing. Or my language is not good. My dressing style is not good. My food culture is not commendable. This is the way we let these thoughts grow in our mind, so that it is easy for them to colonize us. Colonizing, in the settling mode of colonizing is over. They have left the nation, still minds are colonized. Our minds and thoughts are colonized. The reason is this prejudice, assigning or attributing superiority to something European or Western, and thinking that everything non-Western or non-European is good for nothing. It's not taught in schools, but somewhere at some point in your life, during our growing up, we all take this for granted. Said identifies a European cultural tradition of Orientalism. Here it doesn't mean the text name, but it's given in the single quote, means that can be taken as a concept as well, which is a particular long-standing way of identifying the East as other and inferior to the West. What is that? Now, the text gives us the idea of Orientalism, apart from its being the title of Edward Said the critic's text. You have to know the idea of Orientalism. What is the idea of Orientalism? Which is a particular and long-standing way of identifying the East as other. That's how the binary, that's where this binary subject and the other becomes very important. Yes? So, other is given in single quote with a highlighted O as a capital, O, the other, O of that other, O-T-H-E-R, O in capital means it's subject other binary, and you refer to anything East as other, not the subject. You know how important subject is in our discussion in language, sentence building. It's very important. That subject is very important. Which is the subject of this sentence? That's what we always look at. And accordingly we decide what the verb form should be, what this tense form should be, all those. Which should be the main verb. So the subject is very important in that regard. But we all get counted as the other, not as the subject. We. When I say we, I mean Eastern, the people belonging to the East or non-European people, including Indians, we Indians. And inferior to the West. So East is the other and inferior to the West. We are all inferior to the West. That's the idea that is getting communicated, disseminated. And we take it for granted because of the already prejudiced notions that are along with us throughout. So what about the idea getting elaborated by the theorist himself? Edward Said has a lot to talk about Orientalism. Actually, this is a text itself. We cannot just discuss this as a literary term and close down the book and go. It's a book-length publication which talks about the nuances, the loopholes, everything regarding the concept of Orientalism. To put it very simply, Orientalism is the way West looks at East. Means it may not be something desirable. Their way of looking at us, their way of approaching us, their thoughts about us cannot be expected to be really desirable, preferable, because we know they distorted our past, they exploited us, they obstructed, they harassed, they obstructed our freedom, they interrupted our identity, they did all those cruel, they approached the colonized lands with all kind of cruelty. So you cannot expect this Orientalism, the way of West looking at the East, to be something better. It's not like your mother looking at you. It's not the way your parents look at you with compassion, love, care, concern. That's not the way West looks at East. Or Westerners look at the Eastern subjects. See, we say we are subjects, but they say that we are the other, marginal other. This is the problematizing of these terms. The Orient, he says, features in the Western mind as a sort of surrogate and even underground self. What is this surrogate? Surrogate. You might have come across the term surrogate motherhood. It's not the real way, the natural way of a woman carrying a child. Surrogate motherhood. It's by a scientific other means a woman gets impregnated and she bears the child without having any concern. Maybe later she may develop concern, but according to the concept, it's purely based on science, where the woman does it as a deal between the parents. Sometimes parents, those who the husband and wife, because of their health issues or something, if they cannot have children, some of them opt for this. And surrogate motherhood is lacking the real concern or what is ideal about a mother or what is preferable in a mother-child relationship. So in the same way, here also you can see a sort of surrogate. That's like, anyway it's secondary. It's unlike the real motherhood and child-mother relationship. So here Western mind They say that it's a sort of surrogate and even underground self. You people, you Indians, you Africans, you Eastern people, the people belonging to East. You are an underground self. You are nothing in front of us in terms of our technology, development, culture. You are nothing. This is what they say. They used to say, and they still go on saying, if not straight to face. And we are willing to most of, and even now we can see majority or at least a considerable percentage of every Eastern or every Oriental subject willingly taking these notions for granted, so that they participate in their own subordination, as you talk about the same in suppression of women. There also the same thing happens. Suppression of women. Why? How does it happen? How does it become easy at least? It's a question. They participate in their own subordination. You might have come across this idea in feminist criticism. Exactly this sentence is there. I think in the same text, Barry itself, Peter Barry itself. Because they participate in their own subordination means what? A mother says that a mother with 2 kids, one boy and a girl. She says that okay, he should be given provided with the best education. When the girl child demands that, if the mother takes the stance like why should we spend too much on your education? Anyway, you are going to be part of another house, or you are going to serve in the kitchen of some other man. So these cliched talks and cliched comments are part and parcel of even the literate Keralite context, Keralite familial context. You cannot deny that. എന്തായാലും നാളെ കെട്ടിച്ചു വിടേണ്ടതല്ലേ? You might have come across this comment. It's very irritating, but getting repeated, still existing, still getting disseminated. And that's how that same woman, a woman participates in her own subordination. I didn't get proper education, so that I'm ending up serving in the kitchen. So my daughter should not be like that. There are mothers who take this stance as well. They are rebels. They can bring change. The others can never. The same thing happens in the case of a post-colonial subject. You cannot be satisfied with your Indian languages, your mother tongue. You feel, oh, I have very less mark in Malayalam. You are very happy to say that. You think that this is a matter of prejudice. Pride, not prejudice actually, mixed up with Jane Austen. You think that to say you don't know Malayalam is a matter of pride. Actually, it's a matter that brings you or that takes you in a very sympathetic position. It's a pathetic condition that you say or you assert that I score very less marks in Malayalam. If a person belonging to Tamil Nadu says the same with Tamil, then also it's a matter of something that brings you or that makes you in a pathetic existential crisis. But you don't realize that, because you think that I know English very well, but Malayalam this is the way people do. People do with your mother tongue, your own mother tongue, and you are participating in your own subordination. It's really fine that you know Malayalam, English, Hindi, Tamil, everything very well. Why should you relegate? Why should you try to relegate your own mother tongue? Subordinate your own, derogate your own mother tongue for the sake of highlighting something else. So that is the way people do nowadays, and that's how you participate in your own subordination. This theory is taught not just for the sake of examination. Try to keep in mind, try to recollect your own life, your own, the people around you, the way you approach your mother tongue, your own stance. You can recollect, rethink, go for an introspection. This is how modern literary theories are too relevant. Otherwise, it's just for the sake of examination, but it's not like that. These are contemporary theories, contemporary literary theories. Some texts list out these modern theories under the such title like contemporary literary theories, because these are so relevant in your socio-political and cultural context. Now, and there is the name of a text given like literature in the modern world. Page number is given where this particular sentence comes. But now this means in effect that the East becomes the repository or projection of these aspects of themselves which Westerners do not choose to acknowledge. See that? Edward tries to go for a very deeper level analysis of the Western unconscious, where you people they attribute all these negative labels, characteristics on the Eastern people, like cruelty. They are cruel. They say that we are cruel, Indians or the Africans. We are cruel, sensual, we are instinctual, animalistic. Then decadence, laziness, everything negative gets attached to us. But Edward says that actually they are aware that their culture is not that good. Their personalities, their ways, their style of life, their perspective, nothing is really appreciable, but they will not admit that. So that they are blaming or they are trying to impose those labels which they feel that actually this is part of their own selves on someone else. And they try to find out a kind of solace out of this. So, if you take that, if you want, you can take very simple day-to-day life examples. Then you will understand what they are doing, or the loophole of that what they are doing. Westerners impose negative labels, negative characteristics on us. They say that these are their characteristics, they are like this or that, very bad about us, Indians, Africans or any other non-European people. But actually they are not that confident about their own selves. But they are not in a situation, or they are not willing to admit that. So that whatever negatives they feel about themselves, they try to attach or impose on others' heads. This is what is actually happening. The way West looks at East, that's what you mean by Orientalism. But actually, this is a kind of, you might have come across ego defense mechanism. Not immediately connected with this, but in psychoanalytic criticism, you have this kind of a concept of ego defense mechanism. Let us leave theoretical background and will get you very simple example. You commit you spill water on the floor or tea on floor. you with a 100% assurance expect scolding on the part of your mother. Because you are careless, you did that, and the mother is in a hurry, so she cannot manage that situation and she definitely will scold you. But immediately before that, you are taking a very cunning step that before giving chance for your mother to start scolding, you start scolding her back. Why did you keep this cup here? Why did you do like this? You should have expected me to walk in this way. I am also in a hurry. All those, you don't let chance for the mother to speak a word. So this is what you mean by ego defense mechanism. Sometimes you practice this with, especially with your siblings. And again, the same way, ego defense mechanism is that you think you are sure that you are almost sure that your part is not really clear and perfect, but you will not let that known to others, or you shall not admit that, and the problem occurs where you start blaming others for actually what you know, it's part and parcel of your own self. The same way, these Westerners also know that even though we fools are praising them or trying to imitate them, take them for granted, feel that they are high, they are superior, but actually they know they are not that perfect, not appreciable. They have a lot of imperfections, but they will not admit that straight to face. And there, because of this ego, see, for satisfying their ego also, they do the same. Like they impose all those labels which they know, at least for the sake of knowing that these are all our characteristics as well, but they will not admit you. And then at the same time, and paradoxically, the East is seen as a fascinating realm of the exotic. But you just think, these people, these colonizers came to our land, settled here, conquered us. They came as visitors. They were very friendly while they are coming here. So some of the power holding people began to show them our lands, our wealth, everything. But later they began to change their face and stance, and they settled here, tried to establish colonies, and they could establish it easily well. And think about this situation. They are blaming us. They say that this is good for nothing a country. Culture arose here, or culture got introduced here only after our coming. This is what they claim in their historical records, in their books, or many other portrayals about India or any other Eastern nations or previous colonies of theirs. But think about just ask the question back, like if this is good for nothing a land, why did they take this much effort, this much pain to settle here? They knew for sure that this is a land of exotic qualities. We are rich in our wealth. You know, that's why poets sang like, they can take away our wealth. They can loot us of our spices, many other crops, everything. But they can never take away our climate and all. നമ്മുടെ ഞാറ്റുവേല അവർ കൊണ്ടുപോകില്ല എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ് പാടിയിട്ടുണ്ട്, കവി പാടിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. In Malayalam there is a poetic line like that. It's very important. It's too great a line that it talks about the confidence. They can loot us. They can take away. They can exact our spices, many other crops, our grains. Even nowadays, even when you pay visit to some of the museums, you can see the doors decorated with the precious stones. You can see a lot of voids there, void, V-O-I-D, the term, void, an absence. Those are looted by them. The diamonds, emerald, ruby, everything on those doors, that royal wealth of India or any other such previously colonized nations got looted by these settlers, these colonizers, westerners. So that itself is a significant point where they knew that this nation, we are rich in our culture, wealth, crop, climate. You just think about climate. They take loads of coconut to be planted in Britain. They can never do with that. They can never think about, or they cannot expect that crop to flourish in that area. Their geographical, climatical condition, most of the Indian crops will not flourish, will not bear fruit. And this itself is the lesson for them. So they knew that this is an exotic land of that much quality. Exotic. What do you mean by exotic? It's a fascinating realm of the exotic. That's another feature of post-colonialism. Actually, the people have the tendency to mark down something which is not comprehensible for them as something invalid. There is no need for in search of some complicated examples. What about all those grapes are sour? Told by the fox. Fox wanted that grapes badly, but he couldn't catch it. It's at height. It's in a high, and again he jumps and jumps, tries, fails. At the end he understood that, or understands that, I cannot get this. So he starts blaming that, who needs that sour grapes? And we have the saying, like, those which are not available to us. We try to console ourselves with such saying like, kittata mundiringa kulikkum. That's what we say in Malayalam. In the same way, actually they know that we are far advanced than them. At least equivalent, desirable a land, Indian land is desirable. African land is desirable. Our geography, our other localities and other features of the land, the culture, everything is something great. But they will not admit that. And the same stance they take in the mode of labeling this East as something, a fascinating realm of the exotic. It's unable to identify, it's unable to comprehend them. Their culture, their ways, their style. It's not really good. That's what they say. Because they do not comprehend, they cannot comprehend. the mystical and the seductive. They say that it's mystical. Mystical land, it's seductive. These people are, problematic, they are sensuous, they are like animals. They come in very perfect coat, suit and such other dressing style. And during that time, the tribal dressing style, you might have watched that movie Parashiraja. Think about the dressing of the warriors and even that of kings. It's very simple dressing style. But that is actually perfect fit for the Indian climate. Nowadays, whatever we do in terms of imitating that, we have coat, suit, everything. Actually, this is what you mean by unnatural, something going against natural. Your nature, your climate demands, our Indian climate demands a particular kind of dressing style, which should not be actually covering you with the thick clothing or coat. All those sophistications are not at all preferable or fitting in the suitable for the Indian climate. But we people cannot stay away from doing that because we are imitating the Westerners. During April, May, in India, take Kerala. India, there may be different climatic condition in different localities. In north, we cannot, again, there also we have hot climatic condition, seasons, according to seasonal change. But take Kerala situation very well. It's very easy for us to see how, according to the seasonal change, our attire and our bodily temperature, health of our skin problems. We are likely to have skin problems during April, May, that hot climatic summer, during summer time. And still you insist upon wearing coat and suit every time, the whole day. This is because of your fascination for something Western. There you are against your own nature. Geographical features of a nation, land, has a lot to do with the people, their skin, the skin condition of their skin, quality of their skin, demands of their skin. Actually, that needs some, our skin is, actually we can be alright with any kind of climatic situation, I think. Like hot also, to an extent we can bear. Cold, again we do not have that much cold. That's why we are in one way or other fine with that. But these Westerners, during most of the time of an year, they have very cold climate. But so that when they come to India for paying visit and all, they find it very difficult to. So this is a fascinating realm of the exotic. For them this is actually a fascinating realm of the exotic. The mystical and the seductive. But they will not admit that. It also tends to be seen as homogeneous. The people there being anonymous masses. They will never agree that you are people with identity. They say that it's anonymous masses. You are anonymous masses. What do you mean by anonymous? Elegy written in a country churchyard is written by Thomas Gray. Beowulf is written by, we don't know, it's anonymous. So you don't have a person to be identified as the owner, the creator, writer. So you are anonymous. Some person, some genius might have written that, and many other such anonymous creative pieces of literature. But you are not but they are not acknowledged as part of their creativity, their skill. So the same way Westerners declare us to be anonymous masses rather than individuals. Individuals, with identity, but they do not allow or promote us in that way. Their actions determined by, and they say that our actions, that the colonized people, colonized subjects, their actions are determined by instinctive emotions. What do you mean by instinctive emotions? Instinct. Your intellect is not working, but your instinctual nature with a lust. It's lust is not love. Lust is almost like animalistic. Animals going for having sex. That's the way you talk about lust. There is no content of love. It's missing there. And human beings are expected to have love. So this is the way terror, fury, every negative terms are attached with the colonized subjects, rather than by conscious choices or decisions. So they say that, Westerners say that you are not capable of conscious decisions, making perfect decisions. So this is their way of talking about us. Their emotions and reactions are always determined by racial considerations. All these are part of Orientalism, the way West looks at East. Try to recollect that point as well. The emotions and reactions are always determined by racial considerations. Means every time they are thinking in terms of race, prejudices and all. That's what they say. Actually, they are prejudiced on behalf of color, race and all. That's why they call us black. They are like this because they are Asiatics or blacks or Orientals. When they say this, there itself they are racial prejudice. Venomous attributes come there, because they say, the reason they say that we are these Indians are criminals, or the Africans are criminals, furious, problematic. And the reason they say that this is because they are Asiatics, they belong to Asian hemisphere, or blacks or Orientals, they are blacks. This is what they say. This is the way they look at us. And the study of this way of looking at the East became a book titled Orientalism by Edward Said. He studies it in detail, the nuances of this, the problems, how problematic it can be in different spaces, in academics, many other cultural domains, how problematic it is to see their approach towards us. So they are, rather than by aspects of individual status or circumstance. It's not even like, they are Indians. So all Indians are like this. This is what they say. We are Africans. All Africans are there, like this. There are Indians who are educated, who are taking up better professional positions, or living in a very better manner, who are very good human beings. All these are there. So, but that is not taken as such. Just wait. So, rather than by aspects of individual status or circumstance, like, there are people not just in India but in Western nations as well who cannot get proper education, who cannot be in better financial positions, that cannot take up any professional life. But they do not consider all those. This is almost like taking a generalizing view, generalizing, attributing on people. Indians, you are Indians, so you are like this. You are Africans, so you are good for nothing, you are like this. This is the stance taken by the Westerners whenever they approach us, or whenever they portray us in their literature. They always try to hide the positive side of India, positive side of Africa, or any other Eastern nations. For instance, because they happen to be a sister or an uncle or a collector of antique pottery. Like you say, like, yeah, that is family of teachers. So all of them are likely to be like this. Or they almost all of them will take only that profession. If another one takes a different profession, people may have the tendency to ask like, oh, how can she be like that? They are by birth, they are well versed in that profession or this profession. So this is the way you hold that prejudice against people. In the same way, the same effect is there when Westerners looking at India and commenting like, you are Indian so that you are not intelligent, you are good for nothing, all those. As it says, after quoting the example of a colonial administrator's 1907 account of life in Damascus, in such statements as these, we note immediately that the Arab or Arabs have an aura of apartness, definiteness, and collective self-consistency. So my italics is that of the textbook writer. Collective self-consistency in the beginning theory text is given in italics. That's why he gets that in my italics. It's not in italics actually. Arabs have an aura of apartness, definiteness, and collective self-consistency. So this is a very prejudiced way of talking about Arabs. They try to attribute some labels as very consistent as part of the identity of every Arab. Actually, that's not like that. My father, my mother, they are teachers. I also like teaching. You cannot expect again my sister was given chance to be a teacher in one of the colleges after her completing her BTech degree. During that time it was possible. But she didn't want to take up that profession. So, can you compel a person who doesn't have that interest in such a profession? No. So this is the way when you say that all Arabs are like this. There are number of people and individual differences are there. But these Westerners are trying to hide and erase that differences. They are taking a very intolerant stand towards differences of that kind, such as to wipe out any traces of individual Arabs with narratable life histories. But you are generalizing one particular tribe or particular group of people on behalf of their being Arabs or Indians or whatever. This is how we end up the discussion on under that title. Actually, it's a background. The first title on post-colonial criticism is background, and all these discussions come under that. All these points come under this. The whole discussion comes under this. Next main title is post-colonial reading, and this is a comparatively lengthy part. After that, we will talk about stop and think session, then what post-colonial critics do, and last, as usual, post-colonial criticism and example. With that, we will come to the closing, the ending up of our discussion on post-colonialism as well. But we have to get more hours for that as well. So thank you so much for joining. Anyway, you can leave now.